Welcome to another EARTHCARE Zoom presentation. My name is Gail Woon, and I am the founder of EARTHCARE. We are an environmental education non-governmental organization or nonprofit that specializes in environmental education. And we work primarily in the Bahamas, but we have done presentations in other countries as well. Today's presentation is on habitat destruction or remediation. And so what we have in the first slide is on the left, we have a healthy reef, and then the right-hand slide, we have a reef damaged by human interaction. In this case, this is a anchor chain from a cruise ship. And this is a closer look at that first slide. This is a healthy reef. You can see the sponges are healthy, the soft feathers are healthy. We've got some coral in the background, and we've got beautifully colored fish, and that's a healthy habitat. This is an example of an agricultural farm, and basically I wanted to show you this as to compare it to a reef system versus a farm. And reefs, healthy coral reefs, produce much more products than the same size agricultural system or farm. So it's really important that we protect our coral reefs. Another habitat that is very important worldwide is the mangroves. And these bushes that you see out over this boardwalk are mangroves. We've got red, white, and black mangroves that grow in the Bahamas. They are very essential for multiple reasons. If you could see the prop roots coming out of these red mangroves, they actually build land. They also are an amazing habitat for, they're a nursery for many creatures that live in the ocean and in the estuaries. So it's a nursery for all sorts of marine creatures. As well, the prop roots, they build land. So when sediments are washed in to an area that has mangroves with prop root systems, the soil or the sand or whatever sedimentation is held in by the roots. And over time, the areas that have healthy mangroves actually build land rather than in other areas where you have the Australian pines. Those particular plants, which are not native to the Bahamas, are they contribute to erosion of our land. So mangroves are very important, and I can't stress how important they are. They also provide amazing protection from storms. We had a devastating climate change. Hurricane Dorian hit the islands of Grand Bahama and Abaco very hard in September of 2019. And one of our settlements that had a very intact, healthy mangrove system didn't have any deaths. The storm did destroy buildings, but everyone who had elected to stay in that key remained alive. And we've seen similar things happen with the tsunami of 2004 in the Indo-Pacific, where mangroves have been taken out and hotels have been built on the beach. There was massive mortality. Where the mangroves were left intact, we saw much less mortality and a lot less erosion. So mangroves are really, really important and should be protected all over the world. This is our Caribbean pine. It's the indigenous pine for the Bahamas. It is very sensitive to fresh water or the lack of it, fresh water. So since we had storm surge, which caused saltwater intrusion in the water table on Grand Bahama, and I'm sure in Abaco as well, where we used to have vast stands of Caribbean pine. Now some of them are just sticks where the salt water has intruded into the freshwater lens or the groundwater. So until that groundwater comes back as fresh water, and that's happens very rarely with saltwater intrusion. Very rarely does it reverse. So until that happens, those Caribbean pines probably will not repopulate those areas. This is an example of the underwater tunnels that are throughout the islands of the Bahamas. Our main substrate is calcium carbonate, which is very acts like a sponge. So water and minerals can make tunnels through the rock itself. So what we have throughout most of our islands are cave or cavern systems, what we call blue holes. So these are tunnels basically, but they're under the seawater level, the sea level. So they're filled with ocean water and in some cases rainwater. So throughout most of our islands, we have all these we have tunnels underground that are filled with salt water and amazing geological formations, as well as some species that have only been recorded in our caves, our underwater caves or blue holes. We also have many islands. We have 700 keys, and one of them, called Guana Key, is the site of a huge development by a company based out of California. Our government gave them I don't know how many acres at 50 cents an acre, and the people who lived on Guana Key, there was only about 300 residents there, decided that they didn't really want a huge development, so they pooled their resources and hired a lawyer and tried to fight the development. That court battle went on for a few years. Throughout that, I think the project was stopped for about 6 months, perhaps a year, and even went all the way to Privy Council, which is our Supreme Court, which is, we're still under the Commonwealth, so that if we have cases that go that far, they have to go to Privy Council in London to be litigated. But during the course of the case, we brought in reef scientists, reef biologists, and tried to explain to them that if they put a golf course on the beach, it was going to degrade the beaches, as well as the runoff from the fertilizers that are needed to keep the greens green were going to negatively affect the ocean and the coastal habitat. So now what used to be sandy, clear water bottom is now covered in red and green and brown macroalgae. So this is what it looked like before the golf course. This is what the beach looks like underwater after the golf course. And these algae are a sign of eutrophication, which is a fancy word of saying nutrient pollution. So basically what we had told them was going to happen has happened. And now also those macroalgae are overgrowing the coral reef, which is a little further out in deeper water. So it's not good. We also have problems with marine debris. EARTHCARE periodically does underwater cleanups as well as beach cleanups throughout the year. And it's really mind-boggling the amount of waste or marine debris that we find underwater, which I guess people think because it's underwater, no one will see it. But it's just horrendous, the amount of things. This was just a portion of the amount of stuff that was brought up on this particular day. I spoke about mangroves and their value. Even though mangroves are protected in the Bahamas, our governments, various different governments, have allowed developers to destroy mangroves. This slide is in South Bimini. And this one is in North Bimini. There is a controversial project that was started, probably 30 years ago by a man named Mr. Capo. And it's since changed hands several times, but during the course of their development, they bulldozed and razed to the ground many, over 300 plus acres of mangroves, and had the audacity to sell it back to the residents as mulch. They also were allowed to dig into the North Sound, which was much studied by the University of Miami and various other research institutions, lagoon and a nursery for much marine life, as well as quite a few sharks. And the biological laboratory on South Bimini is called Shark Lab because their main focus is sharks and research on sharks. In fact, during Shark Week, many of the documentaries that you see, they have to go to Bimini to talk to the scientists there, who are the main people for the whole world as far as shark experts. So what happened, the developer was allowed to literally dig out the bottom of the North Sound, bring the bottom up, and they made little roads so they could dig up more and more. And they used that cheap fill, to build more land so that they could make more $1 million residences to sell to their buddies in Miami. So it was not a good thing, and a lot of habitat destruction. I find this slide very poignant. It's this one poor little mangrove trying to maintain its life in the midst of all the destruction going on in Bimini, and that's a shot of the North Sound. More of dredging there in North Sound, Bimini. I took this photo from the air. You can see this line here should have been a silt curtain. A silt curtain would float on the surface and go all the way down to the bottom and keep silt from coming out onto the other parts of the healthy environment. And you can see here that wasn't happening. And the reason for that is these were not silt curtains. These were oil booms, which is simply one piece of foam that floats on the surface, which has there's no possible way this can do anything to help with this amount of siltation started by their bulldozing and digging up the sound. So if you picture Bimini, all of this area here was ocean. And now they've pretty much dug it up and made more land so that they could sell more condominiums. Another aspect of this very huge mega development that was unsustainable and still is they built a 1,000-foot cruise ship terminal. Now, the reason they picked this area was because their casino was right adjacent. So even though we told them 14 prime dive sites were right around this area, and we actually litigated it and got it to Privy Council and showed that they started their construction without permits, it was only stopped for 24 hours. And then the Supreme Court of the Bahamas ruled that the litigants had to pay $600,000 in order to continue the litigation. So that pretty much put that court case to a stop. So they were allowed to continue their destruction. The irony is those dive sites were very much impacted by the sedimentation. The cruise ship came, and every time it came in, whatever sedimentation was on on the bottom was dug up again and put into the water column to settle again on top of the already starving and smothered corals. So that happened for about a year, and then they decided the cruise ship wasn't making enough money, so they stopped the cruise ship but not until after they destroyed all of that prime habitat. And this is them starting the construction on the terminal. Poor seagull, didn't know what was going to happen. The irony is with Bimini, in the year 2000, marine protected areas were announced, and the first one was Bimini. And this is the area that's been dug up, and this is the area where the cruise ship terminal is. The irony is that later on, many marine protected areas were announced, but because of the power of this developer has somehow with government, Bimini's marine protected area was never finalized. So it's not protected. We had another big development to happen. It was going to happen in West End. And basically, that was called the Ginn Project. It was going to have skyscrapers and big marinas and beautiful $1 million residences. So when that happened, they basically took down all the pines from probably Holmes Rock all the way to West End, which is quite a long way. That year, I was very worried because if we had had a hurricane or anything, there was basically nothing to protect the residents there. They left one tree in West End because it was too big for them to cut down. We also have more recently, as in last year, oil storage facility now owned by a Norwegian company called Equinor had a catastrophic failure of their tanks during Hurricane Dorian. And everyone who was on the island was busy trying to survive because most everyone had gotten devastating damage to their houses and jobs and everything. But out on the way to East End, this is what was happening. One of the, well, actually several of their large 1 million gallon capacity tanks, the tops had ripped off, and during the storm, the oil was literally lifted out of the tanks and spread all over the land. You can see here, that's one that the top stayed on, but still you could see the oil was taken out of it. This is one that the top had ripped off. The tops were literally unrecognizable and found huge distances away from the facility. One thing that we don't think about too much is our ecotourism market. And we have, over the last, I'd say 20, 25 years, had a upsurgence of bird watching tourism. So that's really a good thing. We have a lady named Erica Gates who has taken it upon herself to train bird watching guides, birding guides throughout our family islands. And we've got several islands where you can only see certain birds. So we've got Inagua and Andros and Nassau, New Providence, Grand Bahama. And so she's done training sessions and trained eco tour guides for most of those islands. And we now have a vibrant birdwatching tourism industry. One of the reasons we need to protect habitats is that they're basically the lungs of the planet. And this is a slide talking about in 2005, 1/5 of the Amazon rainforest had been cleared by deforestation. But within the last year or 2 years, in addition to that, we've had fires, and the fires are fueled by, or a result of, our human-induced climate change. So the Amazon rainforests are on fire, as well as many parts of the west coast of the United States. And then they have some devastating fires also going on in Australia. And those are all devastating to the habitat. I just put this in to let you know that we have a very indigenous site-specific iguana. This particular animal only lives on San Salvador, one of our islands. And this particular animal was one of, I think, 13 that were stolen from the national park, stuffed into socks, and taken with 2 women to the United Kingdom. They were planning to take them onto a collector in Germany and make, I guess, a lot of money. But the UK inspectors caught them. Several had died en route, but the ones that were still alive were confiscated, cared for, and eventually returned to the Bahamas National Trust, who reintroduced them back to San Salvador. We also have threats to habitat with sound. You wouldn't think sound is something that can kill a big thing like a whale, but the United States Navy tests their sonar regularly. They have a naval base on Andros, and in the tongue of the ocean, they do a lot of sonar testing. And we have a marine mammal research organization, the Bahamas Marine Mammal Research Organization, which is based in Sandy Point, Abaco. And we had a few years where we were getting a lot of dolphins and whales, beaked whales, stranding and basically dying on shore. And they were able to do sampling and take ear samples from the animals and send them up to Woods Hole, where they were analyzed. And what was happening was the huge sounds that the Navy was putting forth were basically bursting the eardrums of the whales, and that was part of their navigational system. So when their ears were bleeding, they couldn't navigate, and so they would end up on shore instead of into deeper water. So that was quite a controversy. It ended up going to court. You don't see much of it happening now. We're hoping that the Navy is behaving, but they may be just going to deeper water, and then the whales would just die out in the deep water and not make it to shore. So I'm not entirely convinced that they've stopped what they're supposed to stop. Good news is we have schools getting in on making sure our water bodies are clean, our beaches are clean. I was in Eleuthera and I happened to be passing through this Blue Hole area. And at the time, a school called the Island School was doing a cleanup of that water body. And so I was very happy to see that happening. We also have another issue in that we have a company called Martin Marietta Bahama Rock, which has been given license to harvest Grand Bahama Island. And a few years back, they had intentions to mine that whole area in blue on the diagram there. And these are quite populated areas. I think the second largest settlement in the Bahamas is in this area. Now, had they been allowed to take all of this limestone and ship it out for profit, that would have left these populations vulnerable, very vulnerable to hurricanes, and just would have devastated the environment in general. Luckily, we were able to agitate enough that that project was canceled, but instead they decided to go deeper into the harbor, which actually caused some more damage, but that's another story. We have also the Pirates of the Caribbean Disney movies. The second one and the third one were shot in Grand Bahama. A piece of the coastline was cut out, a square actually, and was not bulkheaded properly with concrete. It was just, you could see just the metal was holding in the fill where they dug out the square. Also, that work was done without an environmental impact assessment being done. They did end up doing a quick one, environmental impact assessment, but it was after the project had started, and basically it was pretty worthless because you're supposed to do it before a project is started. So what's happened is the people who live in that area now have a beach strewn with rocks instead of sand. Their wells, their water wells, are now have saltwater intrusion, so they don't have fresh water coming from their wells. And when they go swimming in the ocean, they have to wear shoes because there's so many rocks that have come from the ocean trying to get that fill back. As well, I was able to snorkel on those reefs, and there is you can see where the inshore reefs were smothered in the sedimentation, so they have died. This is an example, a quick video of a project that was done with 2 environmental groups from China, the Water Keepers Bahamas and Save the Bays and EARTHCARE. So I just wanted to show you, this is an example of people, citizen scientists, taking it upon themselves to help habitats and restore habitats. So what you can do, you can pay attention to current events, read your newspapers, question everything, and learn as much as you can about the different habitats so that you can understand what it is that we stand to lose by unsustainable habitat destruction. After you have educated yourself, spread the word and teach your friends. Make a project of restoring a wetland or other habitat. Plant native trees like mangroves. Write letters to government if you have concerns about any particular project. Start or sign a petition about your issue. Join an environmental NGO or non-governmental organization. And remember that the power is in your hands. You are the person who can determine what your government does, and we have to make sure that they value our habitats and help to remediate the ones that have been damaged. So thank you for your presentation, my presentation, or watching this, and I'll open it to questions. Does anyone have any questions? You can open up your mics if so. Okay. All right. Well, I thank everyone for coming, and I really appreciate you taking time out of your weekend to spend it with us.